Ora koutou and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today at New Zealand's hotel sector mid-year update, which is brought to you by Tourism Industry Aotearoa and Horwath HTL. So today's event is scheduled to run for 90 minutes and we'll be hearing from industry leaders and global experts on how COVID-19 has impacted the industry and the outlook for the remainder of 2020. We're also recording this webinar and it will be available on the hotel conference website at the end of tomorrow. So most of us were expecting to be sitting in the great room at the Quartus Hotel for the next couple of days for the hotel conference. So like everyone, in one of those overused buzzwords of the moment, we have had to pivot. And while there's been a lot of webinars over the last few months, and we've certainly all finally learned how to use that technology that we had sitting in our organisations, few have been for the hotel sector specifically. I know all of you are across the impact of COVID-19 on our sector, but perhaps to quickly summarise, not only have we had the loss of almost 4 million international visitors, most operators in all regions have also felt the loss of the domestic market for the period of the lockdown. So according to the hotel statistics run by both TIA and Fresh Information Company, for the quarter ended May 2020, national occupancy has fallen to 28.8%. That's a drop of over 50 points. While rates have held relatively well during this period, but appreciating that with little occupancy, it's probably not going to have been in that quarter that we will have seen any significant rate improvement. But that drop in occupancy of over 50 points equates to a loss of accommodation revenues across the TIA member hotels around New Zealand of over $200 million, let alone the loss of revenue from food and beverage, conference business and the other events that hotels would typically host at this time of the year. As you all know, domestic tourism accounts for approximately 60% of hotel occupancy, and the maths obviously just don't add up that this market can actually replace the international market. Unemployment and domestic sentiment are also going to impact on demand levels going forward, and we're already seeing that some segments are taking longer to recover than others. We also know that New Zealanders don't spend at the same way or at the same level as our international markets. And while the trans-Tasman bubble is another potential green shoot, another one of those buzzwords, this market also doesn't spend in the same way as visitors from China, the US, the UK, and our other international markets. Yesterday's announcement of a virtual APEC, while understandable, will be a blow to hotels in Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch, and no doubt there will be a ripple effect across other regions as well. While the provision of the wage subsidy by the government through to mid-August has assisted hotels, there has been a significant number of jobs lost within hotels. The uncertainty around the continuation of this support is actually creating a business environment where the risk of bad decisions is increasing, as there is insufficient information available to operators and to owners on which to make informed decisions. So TIA is certainly continuing to push hard for the government to make a timely announcement on this. Our first speaker will shed more light on many of these issues. So can I introduce you to Wim Rupert, who's the director at HTL, to share with us the latest results from the Hotel Sentiment Survey. If you have any questions for Wim, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and we'll raise those questions as we can at the end of Wim's presentation. Over to you, Wim.
Thank you, Sally, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. And first of all, I'd like to thank everybody who has completed our second Hotel Sentiment Survey, which we ran between 23 and 29th of June. And in total, we had 110 responses, and which is about the same as the first survey that we held at the end of April. So you will see, and I'll start sharing my screen soon with you to go through a presentation and show you the main results and talk to those. So that's what I'm going to do now. Hope that it all it should work as we have tested it. If it's all okay, you should be able to see the cover page of the sentiment survey first. Yeah, thank you again. So as discussed, as mentioned, we had 110 responses. And the range of responses was very broad and representative. We had 30% out of Auckland, so we had out of all the major cities and across the region, we had a pretty good response rate. Similar, the type of hotels that we had also, we had about 55% of the hotels of more than 100 rooms, which is also pretty broadly representative of the major hotels in New Zealand, and also a good representation of some of the smaller hotels in the regions. Again, similar, the star rating, again, a very representative response rate across all hotel categories, which is great. That's the good news. The other good news is actually compared to the April results is that we have more hotels open. Whereas we had only 20% of hotels fully open in April, that has now increased to about 68%. Again, I think last year in April survey, we had about 58% of the hotels in Queenstown and so on closed. Many of those have now opened as well. And in addition, many hotels now, well, a number of hotels, particularly in Auckland, now, as you know, will operate as quarantine or isolation facilities. Predominantly, so far, only Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch. So regionally, the closed hotels, there's still a few left, obviously. There's about 10% of the hotels are closed, fully closed. The majority of those are still in the South Island. Some in Queenstown and some in the regional South Island. Most of the hotels in Auckland are open, and yeah, you can see on the right hand side of the slide that there's a few pockets left. There's no hotels. The hotels that were expected to close after this are really minimum. Only a few that still expect to close. The bad news is really that is that our 2-year business confidence amongst the hotels has dropped from a -64% to -72%. That is, if we ask hotels if they believe that the trading conditions in 24 months will have improved or deteriorated, there's 72% more people responding that it will be deteriorated than those that say that it is improving. The shift here really comes from where people previously said that it was going to be roughly the same as in 2019. Some of those people have moved to the view that it will take longer than 24 months to recover, and that in 24 months we will not be back at the same level as in 2019. Again, if we're looking at by region, the thing that strikes me really is that everybody in Queenstown thinks, Queenstown and Wanaka thinks that in 24 months' time we will not be back. They will not be back to the same levels as in 2019. Other regional centres like Auckland and the regional Hamilton and Rotorua are the most positive in their outlook, with less than 60%, which is obviously reflective of more of a domestic and a more balanced market conditions in those areas. Surprisingly, still to see really that Wellington's sentiment in Wellington is actually quite low as well, even though we would expect that government spending and a lot of the government business hopefully would recover in that city. Still, if you're looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the expectations there's really not that much change. 40% of the respondents expect that there's an impact will be more than 2 years. Particularly which is roughly the same as in April. Again, the shift by region is very much down to where people believe is more than 2 years. The proportion there is higher in the South Island, in regional South Island, and a bit lower in Hamilton, Rotorua, and even Auckland. So obviously, again, the markets that rely mostly on the international travelers expect that the impact will take longer. Surprisingly, I think there's still quite a few, still a few hotels that think that things will be back to normal within 6 to 12 months. Let's hope that they are right, but unfortunately, most of us think differently. In terms of workforce, the little change in the expectations there. Obviously, we can expect that since April, a larger proportion of the workforce had to be let go. That's now up to 31% or 34%. In April, that was about 8%. As the wage subsidy continues, obviously, there's still quite a lot of people, quite a lot of employees who have been kept in the workforce to date, supported by the wage subsidies. But still, there's still a number of about 48%. Oh no, sorry, about 18% that still are expected to let go, which brings the total of employment lost expected to be lost because of the pandemic to about 50%, 51%, which is slightly down on the 56% that people expected in April. Again, could come with maybe some hotels are opening now, and there is a little bit of an increase in the domestic market, which is in many cases maybe a bit more prevalent than people had thought in April. Again, by region, little surprises there. Most of the employment is going to be lost in the regional South Island, close to 70%, which will be largely impacted by the West Coast, I believe, from the statistics that we see. And Wanaka and Queenstown also close to 60%. Least employment loss is expected in Auckland. It doesn't come as a surprise. That's also where most of the quarantine and isolation hotels are located at the moment. So overall, the expected impact on occupancy rates and total revenue, it's still bad, but slightly improved from April. There's still about, particularly worrying, and we all know about occupancies. Occupancies dropped, and that obviously affected total revenue. What's really interesting, what we're really trying to find out and are keen to see, is what will happen with the average room rates. And there's still 38% of respondents, or 60% of the, or 70% of the respondents, 70% of the respondents expect the room rate to drop between 0 and 50% for the full year, which is slightly less than what was expected in April. So while the impact, particularly the room rates, was 32% of more than 25, expected decline of more than 25%, but the majority is sitting around the between the 0 and the 25% decline. But overall, the respondents that believe that there are declines of more than 50% has dropped quite significantly, which is, and I think that we can only really see the impact of the new normal, for what is going to be the new normal for some time, as it appears, when we look at the June results, when we have some where we see the impact of some domestic tourism and after July, when we see the impact of some school holidays and that corporate business has returned to more sustainable levels. So in terms of forward bookings, we really were keen to see of what the outlook is there and how the bookings are coming in. But despite some of the positive news about the holiday periods, overall close to 80% of hotels see that domestic bookings are much lower than last year, which doesn't, even the bookings were already probably low, the winter seasons were already low, particularly for leisure in much of the country, but we still see a much lower uptake of travel for the next 3 months. There's some pockets where it is close to or better than last year. The majority of those respondents come from Auckland, from Wellington, and from regional from the regional North Island. But you can see, as the rest, it is still well below last year. So in terms of cash flow, the respondents again, it's not as bad. Whereas in April, more than 60% expected to have a negative cash flow for 2020. That number has now dropped to 45%. Still a lot. I mean, if you have a business and you run 45% of the hotels run at a negative cash flow, that's a worrying sign for the industry. Obviously, there's only so long you can sustain that. And but yeah, it is not as bad, but it's still, again, it is still pretty bad. I can imagine that the positive cash flow responses, we know that many of those come from Auckland hotels, and the isolation business that many of those hotels have will obviously help them to prop up their cash flow, but others keep on suffering there. You can see the majority, Christchurch is pretty bad in regions. Regional South Island as well. Yeah, still Auckland is still at 40% as well. So it's pretty spread all over the country. Now, what the hotels need, what's most urgent, not surprisingly, the most urgent needs, what people need to remain open for the next 12 months was the question. What's the minimum that you require? There's a big push, obviously, to open the borders with Australia, which is 50% of respondents say that really, if they want to stay open in the next 12 months, we need to open the borders to Australia by latest September. And another 38% to say, well, we can do that by latest January. But obviously, that's the big stimulus that all of the hotels are looking forward to and need to happen to remain open. The more stimulus of the domestic market, obviously, 88% believe that is still necessary, but as Sally already pointed out, and as we all know, there's only so much that the domestic market can compensate for the loss of the international visitors. Now, then we had a question of how satisfied the hoteliers are with regard to the government response in relation to their hotels. And the overall, the average response rate was basically that the hoteliers give the government a pass mark at 6.3 out of 10, which is just a pass mark. The distribution of the responses is quite interesting to see, actually. We had about there's quite a large number quite a large number of respondents who give the government more than a 6 out of 10. Quite a few will give them 9 and 10 out of 10. There's also quite a few who give the government once 3 out of 4, and there's a large number that gives them a 5. So the overall satisfaction is, or what we're saying, people are giving a pass, but many believe that the government can do more to support the hotel industry. And I'm sure there will be some more discussions about that in the next sessions. So the final question that we looked at was what initiatives hotels are implementing or planning to implement that impact that will be that will last for the long term as a result of COVID-19. Obviously, we have a lot of short-term measures, but we're interested to find out what measures will actually stick beyond 3 to 5 years from now. And a lot of people believe, obviously, that the practices to improve the hygiene standard is that everybody is implementing, or a lot of hotels are implementing, most of them, and they also expect that they will stick for the next 3 to 5 years, or 5 years and beyond. I would think that's really long term. It looks like in the long term, based on these results, hotels, provided that the occupancy and the RevPAR comes back, hotels should be operating a bit more profitable, because we start reorganizing our organization structures, and there's a lot of cost measurements, cost reductions that are put in place. A few are looking at technology upgrades, take the opportunity to refurbish and to upgrade their technology in order to come back stronger after when business picks up again. Particularly, it can be said for many, particularly Auckland and Queenstown, where there's a lot more supply coming online. We can expect that hotels that are not refurbished may have some more difficulty competing when the new modern hotels are opening in periods of what will continue to be some low demand periods. So those are the main findings of our survey. Again, thank you very much to everybody who responded. We'll send out the results, this presentation with the survey, and some additional information to those that have responded. And they're happy to answer any questions. Or Sally, how are we going to do this? I don't know if there are any questions, but please leave it up to you.
Okay. Thank you, Wim. Now, just a reminder to everyone that you can ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But perhaps question, Wim, look, as a sector, we've always seen seasonal employment turnover in New Zealand. So do you think the number of permanent employees who've lost their job is as dramatic as the numbers in the survey suggest?
It's a bit difficult to tell. I mean, the question really asks for people to respond to employment losses as a result of COVID-19. But it's very likely that obviously as a result, the seasonality and the normal staff turnover in hotels, you would naturally see quite some attrition during this period already in many of the hotels. But so 50%, I think 50% is generally pretty much an average of the annual staff turnover of the industry, or close to. So I think it is still high. It is still high, but it may not be as high as it might seem, because otherwise there would also be a lot of attrition during this time of the year.
Okay, thanks. Well, were there any signals or comments in the survey around what sort of additional support the sector might be looking for from government in 2021, particularly if those unemployment levels continue in the way that has been forecast? There
were definitely comments about some comments that I've seen about further extension of the wage subsidy, but also the majority of and some further comments about that hotels can reduce the fixed charges, particularly in terms of reducing council rates support, And yeah, those were the main ones that we came across. I mean, particularly particularly hotels that are where there's no business, where the fixed costs need to be reduced, and things like rates will definitely help a lot.
Okay. All right, well, it looks like you've done a fantastic job on the presentation, and because we don't seem to be having any questions coming through there. So, thank you very much for the time that you've taken on that. And, as Wim's indicated, we will distribute the survey. So look, now we will move across to a panel session of our sector leaders to share their perspectives on the outlook for the industry for the remainder of 2020. There will again be the opportunity for question and answers at the end of this session, so please do use that Q&A button at the base of your screen. So on our panel today, we will welcome Julian Miller, the Senior Vice President of Operations for New Zealand, Fiji and French Polynesia from Accor. We have Brad Burnett, who's the Group General Manager at Sky City Hotels, and Lani Hageman, the Executive Chair of Scenic Hotel Group. And Stephen Hamilton, who's a Director at Horwath HTL, will facilitate this session. So Stephen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. And thank you to our industry leaders for agreeing to share your insights and your thoughts about the current situation that we're in and what the outlook might be for the remainder of the year. It'd be great to know when we're going to be out of this, but it's going to take a bit longer than probably the balance of the year. So, Julian, firstly, over to you. You've seen the results of the sentiment survey, and you've got a broad perspective over New Zealand, being responsible for the largest hotel group in New Zealand, and with lots of hotels in Australia as well, and of course around the world. What's your thoughts about where we're at and what the outlook is over the next few months? What are you seeing?
Sure. Thanks very much, Stephen. Look, if you don't mind, first, I would like to give a big call out to all hotels and our workers and our team members that are looking after New Zealanders who are repatriating back from overseas and actually really working hard to keep New Zealand safe. So I think there's been a lot of mixed reaction. Our hotel teams are working super hard, and I really want to emphasise that they are doing that to assist the entire country and to keep all New Zealand communities safe. So a big sing out to our team, and also the healthcare workers, military and other people that are put under the spotlight in such a challenging time. So I'd like to say a big sing out to all hotels that are doing that, because it is really an amazing task that our teams are undertaking. Look, I guess none of us would have, if you said a year ago we'd all be sitting here on a Zoom call and in the middle of this situation, I think, we would have all scoffed. And I guess that's one of the hard parts. But look, if on Wim's question regarding COVID and the government's response, I guess if it had been broken into two phases, if you asked the government's response as a medical emergency and to protect New Zealand, I think it would score very highly. But now we're in that stage of what is happening from an economic perspective and how are we all going to recover out of this. Having our wonderful industry, which we all love, whichever facet of tourism you're in, we love the industry and that's why we're in it. To see that tap turned off overnight was pretty amazing. I mean, it was like, wow. What are we all going to do? How are we going to get through this? And then there's been all the phases of the alert systems that the government has implemented that we've all dealt with right through. Look, it's challenging. I mean, if you said that the occupancy is 20 and 30% the new 50 at the moment, is it a slow build? We are seeing the domestic tourists want to get out, and particularly after the lockdown. I don't think anyone could wait to get some change of scenery and to really experience something else other than their own home, which they were in lockdown for such a long time. But it's really, there's little shoots. I wouldn't say there's a lot of, the drive market came back. As we know, a lot of things are dependent upon airline travel and airline schedules, particularly how many flights are going to be on to each destination. The domestic drive market definitely saw a positive impact, especially over the Queen's birthday long weekend. As Sally said, the new buzzword is little green shoots, but we are seeing some locations respond and react faster than others throughout the country. So we've seen a slow build probably in locations like Hamilton and Rotorua. They originally potentially during some of those hotels for us did not close, they stayed open, and they were in low single digits, and resized the workforce and tried to utilise the wage subsidy provided by the government to maintain as many people as we could at that time. Then they're on a slow build. They've sort of gone to the 20% and now they're sort of 30% plus, which is a positive. A lot of that though is leisure. And what we are seeing is the weekends are seeing an increase. We're not seeing as much traffic during the week in those locations, and we are slowly building to those weekdays. Other locations like Wellington, for some reason, as you said in the previous slides, a bit slow to come back. A lot of that will revolve around government supporting and encouraging spend. And also, I think now we are really requiring meetings. And as you know, we're doing this via Zoom, and a lot of organisations are now thinking, do they also do business differently? And we also have to make sure we've got the fluid strategies to adapt. What I would say, yes, we're all desperate for Tasman bubble, and having quite a large footprint across the Pacific, it's challenging and it's going to be interesting. Unfortunately, I think everyone would be aware that Victoria has seen some spikes of clusters in the last little while. And if the states within Australia aren't going to open to each other, that's going to be quite a challenging situation to get them to open in an international flight. So it's going to be a watch and see, I think, for how the states react to each other and how they're opening up. What is fortunate is most states are opening up to everyone else in the next few weeks, except Victoria. So that is a positive, and that may assist us in the short term. What we are seeing though is in Australia, very similar to New Zealand, the wage subsidy here has the equivalent of the JobKeeper over there. Australia is actually, and the whole industry is rallying to get that extension through to March 2021. So that is quite significant for the whole industry to be really pushing the government to see that they will need and require support right through to March 2021 is a significant thing to be watching. And I guess that's one of the things that we are seeing from the lack of decision around wage subsidies is actually, and the delay and not finding out about it till closer to the date or by a special announcement, is also potentially affecting all of our teams, because we're making decisions that sometimes are too quick. We can't wait. You've got a process of consultation to follow, and it is quite challenging to actually work without a lot of forewarning. And I think that's something I would like to see if we could gain down the track. I know we're pushing for a lot of more government support and also relief on taxes and also different rates and such, but I think we do need to have more advanced knowledge of some of these items, which would actually help us not resize our workforces just as much. For the back end, I think we will see some recovery and we will see occupancies increase, but we will really see that for the domestic market. Unfortunately, I don't see that we will, this is my opinion, that we will see a Trans-Tasman before, the earliest I would think would be September, October, if we saw it this year at all. And a lot of it will actually be around the medical side and the containment that we're seeing in Australia as to whether they will open that route. So I guess there is some positivity. And I think, look, as an industry, we are quite positive. We don't like being down in the dumps. And I think what I would like to say, though, is for the domestic tourists, most of us have resized. We need to ensure that we are still delivering that amazing experience to our Kiwi guests. you know, I don't want to see our guests come and then they're short-staffed or it's not great, etc. We need to really be selling the message that we are open for service, and we're open here to be here for our Kiwi guests and our domestic business. We need to deliver to a high level the experience that they expect and they deserve. And I think the more good news stories we can get out about that service, that will also help and encourage others to travel. So I guess that's sort of where we see it. There is some positivity. I think it's interesting when you see the locations that are being more positive than others, but together, and we have to do it together. It has to be an aligned approach. We have to have operators and owners talking the same talk to government and having one voice, because one voice is louder together. And I really think our industry will rebound. It will take longer than we all want, but we have to resize, think differently, and really be nimble for the future. I really believe the Pacific and, well, Trans-Tasman at a minimum, but Pacific would be terrific. If we get a Pacific bubble, we will be in a better position. And if that pushes out too long, that is a concern I think that we will all be flagging moving forward.
Thank you very much, Julian. We've got a question here for you as to whether you're seeing any change in booking channels towards Hotel Direct and away from OTAs as part of this Kiwi buy local trend that we're seeing in some retail spending. Are you seeing that in the way people are booking hotel rooms?
Look, unfortunately not. We are still seeing a lot of third-party bookings coming through. And look, obviously we know for all operators, it's much more economic to book direct. I guess a lot of us are also a little bit reluctant on campaigns or big initiatives, because there's a sensitivity of the community sentiment. When is the right time to start sharing facets like that? So, you know, it's I guess a subtle approach to marketing at the moment for most operators and hotels. But again, we will have to gain more confidence with that as we're going through the back end of the year.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Julian. Perhaps we could now move on to Brad from Sky City Hotels. Thanks very much for joining us, Brad. You're well located in the centre of Auckland CBD, in the largest population centre of New Zealand, but have we had a lot of Kiwis moving out of Auckland for these leisure breaks and leaving the Auckland hotels empty? What's been your experience?
Oh, thanks, Stephen, and kia ora, everybody. Great to be on this panel this morning and I guess share some insights. But I'd just like to start by also echoing Gillian's comments regarding our frontline teams and, you know, incredible circumstances that they're working through at the moment. And we're not part of the Ministry of Health program, but just on behalf of us here, just want to share our thanks and support to all of you who are involved in those government programs. You're doing a fantastic job, and I believe there's further recognition to be had. So just wanted to pass our thanks on to you. And also, I do want to acknowledge a fair share of industry leaders that, in my view, have really stepped up and stepped in and shared key messages at key times to key people. Now, whether those messages have been heard in action is another story, but I think we've shown great resilience as a sector, and some really great thought-provoking comments have come through. So thank you to those two groups. Fantastic work. And it is the most challenging of times in our industry at the moment, so thank you. Look, for us, I guess I come at this today from a slightly Auckland-centric position, so apologies to those in the regions, but I wanted to share my thoughts and how we've sort of come through this and where we're at to date, and I guess share a slightly an outlook towards the end of the year and into next year. So we have a slightly different business model than most of you. We have quite a complex precinct here with casinos, food and beverage facilities, tourist attractions, and of course hotels. So we do over 100,000 visitors a week, or we used to, and that brings quite a range of particularly health and safety challenges and concerns and of course protocols that we've had to implement as we've worked through. We're not part of the Ministry of Health program. That would have probably compromised our precinct here in Auckland too severely as we've worked through. So, but nonetheless, health and safety lens has been applied first at the front of everything we've done. The safety of our teams and our people and our customers has always been our top priority. We reopened the precinct on May the 14th in level 2, and I think there's no surprise to anyone. It's consistent across the board. We've had busy weekends, and we've managed to fill both hotels here on Saturday nights. Fridays and have been a reasonable sort of shoulder night for us. And Sunday to Thursday, I think week 1 when we came back, we were literally building our business from nothing. We had no business on the books through May, June, July. And I think week 1 we might have maxed out at about 15%. But last week we were in the 50s, and that's been a really pleasant surprise for us here. We've chased hard any opportunity we can, quite frankly, to try and drive some volume. And so things like sponsorship opportunities of sports tournaments that have been on the horizon, we've absolutely jumped at that to try and optimize any sort of market mix available to generate excitement, entertainment, and of course visitation to our precinct and occupancy in our hotels. And we hope that that base will allow us to grow further into the year. And I have to say, not being part of the Ministry of Health program has actually really helped us in terms of accessing some business organically by not being involved. And you only have to look at the third-party website and see on the front page of listings, I think there was a homestay in Castor Bay on page 1, which just shows you the availability of hotels. And for our 2 comp sets here in Auckland, 2 to 3 hotels in each of those are involved in the government program, which means, so I thank the frontline teams for the great job they're doing, but also thank you just from a Sky City Hotels perspective. We are benefiting actually by not being a part of it and giving a place that people can come to stay in Auckland, which is safe and sound, and you can enjoy yourself here. Consumer and market confidence is slowly coming back. So if I think about our daily briefing sheets and the names on those sheets in terms of VIPs, we're starting to see a lot of regular corporate business come back, which is positive. And I think Gillian alluded to the meeting segment. We are starting to see, and I'm not going to say the overused words, but we are starting to see meetings and exec teams starting to travel again, come to Auckland for a day or two, re-strategize their year ahead, and thankfully spending money in our properties. So that's been quite pleasing to see. And whilst the corporate base is low, it is growing and improving all the time. So that's been good. So for the rest of the year, I mean, who knows? Every day it seems to change, and it's really a survival of the fittest, isn't it, to get through the next 12 months. We know that we've got new hotels opening towards the end of this year. We know that we've got no convention centre opening for at least 2 years. So that's going to be a really challenging period, certainly for the next couple of years. I think there's been some really good work done in terms of forecasts from Tourism New Zealand and CBRE, and we should all be across those. And I largely am in line or agree with them. I think the Trans-Tasman the bubble is probably early 21, and that's just my opinion. I think there's quite a bit at risk there or compromised if we open earlier than that. That's a personal view. And I think international borders probably somewhere around mid-2021. So it's really more of the same until Christmas. But longer term, I feel pretty good. I mean, we know we've got America's Cup going ahead, despite some of the challenges down there at Wynyard Quarter. We know that ASB Tennis are working really hard to put a tournament on December, January this summer. Unfortunate news yesterday, re-APEC, and the significant impacts that will have across not only our sector, but many others towards the end of next year. But, you know, what a great announcement last week with FIFA Women's World Cup as an anchor event, as a major event in our country in 2023. And I think that's fantastic and something to really look forward to. But also before that, remember, we've got Women's Cricket and Women's Rugby World Cup coming. So it's batten down the hatches. It's survival of the fittest for the next, certainly the next 6 months, no question. but longer term for the next 2 years. But there is some good things to look forward to as we evolve. For now, my request is that RTOs really step up and lean in. You need to collaborate. You need to look at partnerships with us in the sector, and you need to move quickly. That's a non-negotiable. Tourism New Zealand, step up. Don't forget about Auckland, and continue and push hard on your domestic campaign, and please collaborate with the sector. For us here, I guess my message to us, the group, is let's keep up the conversations. We've got to look after each other. We've got to support each other. I'm all about unity. Again, Julian mentioned that about alignment in our approach, whether we're lobbying for something, whether it's bed taxes or whether it's wage subsidies. We have to be united in our approach, and I think we'll have much better cut through in that regard. Keep sharing insights. And I think an important one is make sure we remain connected and look after the people that have no work in our businesses. And if you can play a mentoring role or a leadership role in your community with people that are no longer working in our sector, please do that, because we will need them back. We're a great industry. We will be back. There's no doubt about that. And we're going to need great people to come in at the front line in our hotels as we evolve. So please keep those people connected and do what you can to play a leadership role with those people. One last comment from me is absolutely drive direct business. That's it from me. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Brad. Brad, can I ask you, prior to the unfortunate fire at the convention centre, of course, the hotel industry in Auckland was looking forward to, or assuming it was looking forward to, a whole lot of room nights being driven by the NZ International Convention Centre. And I'm guessing, you've had some cancellations, etc., of course, and still a while to wait. Have you got any comments about what you were seeing sort of coming through prior to the fire in terms of room nights?
Well, really, really positive. We had some significant multi-day conventions on the books, sort of from 22, 23 onwards, offshore conventions that were coming at great times of the year. And when I say that, I mean off-season, off-peak times, which would have really suited our industry. Obviously, unfortunately, a lot of that is being pushed out, or we've had to rethink some of that, or our clients have had to rethink their plans. That goes without saying. But I would say it's still an optimistic long-term view. We have some great business on the books for the NZICC sort of down the track, 24, 25, 26. So we may have missed a circuit in terms of them coming down to Auckland in this round for some of these big international corporates, but we'll be back on at the other end of their Asia Pacific circuit, maybe at the other end of it. So it's still really positive, Stephen. There's lots of great business already on the books there, international stuff down the track. But right now the focus for us is just get the thing finished and open.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Brad. That's a positive outlook for when the NZICC eventually opens. Thanks very much and good luck with that project. So perhaps Lani, can over to you now. You've got hotels throughout New Zealand. New Zealand's largest owner-operator, and perhaps you, as I'm guessing, as a hotel owner, you'll be feeling the current situation particularly keenly. What do you think what's your thoughts about where we're at today and where we might be heading over the next few months?
Thanks, Stephen. Can I just firstly say that I cannot echo enough Julian and Brad's comments. Thank God for our industry, for our teams, and I really do support and thank the hotels that have actually stepped up with Ministry of Health to do what they've done. I'm a wee bit in Brad's shoes because currently I'm not part and parcel of that, more for the reason that I'm from all over the country, obviously from the Bay of Islands right down to Gore. So a lot of our properties don't actually fit the criteria. However, in saying that, because I am right across the country, I guess I see things slightly differently to maybe what Brad and Julian are sort of seeing. I look at it and I sort of think to myself, I've been part of Scenic since 1987. And I was thinking, I've come through share markets, bird flus, swine flus, SARS, 9/11. I did Bali bombings, the GFC, earthquakes, and now COVID. And I have to say, I have never experienced anything like COVID. From an owner's point of view, my lovely late husband used to say to me, "You've never seen a depression, and if you ever see one, it's the last thing you want to experience." And he used to say to me, "You have to always prepare for a pandemic." And I said to him, "That's crazy. We're not going to get a pandemic." He was right. I was wrong. I would certainly say, looking at my numbers, and for me as an owner, I've been obviously really keen to try to look at my bottom line, to try to see exactly how we keep every hotel operational as best we can. We've looked across New Zealand. We've closed a lot of our hotels. We've kept, if we have more than one in a region, then we've closed down some so that we can minimize the impact, the cost impact. We've worked through, there's a number of areas we've obviously had to do exactly the same thing as everybody else, and regretfully reduce our team, which has been incredibly sad because a lot of my team have been with me for 30 years. So really heartbreaking to actually have to go through and do that. We've looked at where to from here. How are we seeing our bookings? Currently, we're really only seeing about an 8-week lead-in time for people to make bookings, possibly 10 weeks at the most. Part of that, I'm wondering if that is because they have wanted to get out after the lockdown scenario. So it's still a very big question mark for us as to whether the next 3 months, whether this is actually going to be a trend where people are going to be coming out into the weekends. We're seeing weekend far more than anything else. And of course, every region is quite different. So we have had a couple of regions that have just popped up, as Julian said. We have Tapania up in Napier, and that wee hotel just, I'm not quite sure why everybody decided Napier was the place to be, but I'm very grateful that they did. And that has actually done very, very well. We've certainly seen that turnaround with Queenstown as well. I was down in Queenstown actually last weekend and couldn't believe it. It just felt like it was very normal. People everywhere, people out and about. So that was a very nice feeling. Looking sort of forward for us, I've always kind of been very wary about where this goes. The Trans-Tasman bubble would be lovely. I'm not going to hold my breath for it, to be honest. I think I would rather work in a conservative sort of manner and look to see that I can preserve everything as best as possible. So for me, I kind of think that it's going to take us 3 years to turn ourselves, just to turn ourselves around, not to actually get back to where we are. I think we'll be 5 to 7 years to get back where we were. So that's probably a wee bit pessimistic for some people, but I'm a realist, and having been through all of these things in the past, it does take a long time to sort of rebuild. I probably would say, with my owner's hat, that I really do want to echo Brad's statement. Tourism New Zealand, step up, talk to us, tell us what the plans are. We're all spending millions of dollars on marketing. We're all out there to support. If we actually don't know what the plan is, how do we support you? And I also think government, step up. Yes, you did a great job with some of the, closing the borders. There were things that I think you could have actually done a lot better. But even aside from that, I think now we have regions out there who are dying without support. And I can give you one example that if nothing happens for the South Island of the West Coast, they will see a 4% occupancy till June 2021. That is deathly for those environments. So somebody needs to get on board. We all need to be communicating. We need people to understand that the wage subsidy does need to be extended. Totally agree with what Julian was saying. It has to be extended. I'm happy to have all sorts of hoops that we have to jump through in order to prove that we need it. But ultimately, we do need it. And some of these properties are not going to survive. It is actually cheaper for me to close my hotels down and just hibernate them and go into hiding for a couple of years than what it is for me to actually assist the communities I'm in and try to stay open. I really do think that we need support with rates. I've always said that. I actually do think now is the time to go book direct. So I know that's a wee bit hard, but we're in this for the long run and it's going to take us quite some time to get out of it. So why shouldn't we be supporting ourselves? Book direct, it will help. So that's kind of my position as to where things are for scenic.
Thanks, Lani. You mentioned that, like Sky City, you have not taken any of the government quarantining business. Just occurs to me the west coast of the South Island might be a nice place to have some isolation and quarantine for a couple of weeks. Do you think there's any prospect of that? I mean, the government is signing up more hotels and getting more regional dispersal around New Zealand with that business, and it looks as if that business could keep on going for quite a few more months.
My understanding of it, Stephen, is that they actually need to be by hospitals and quite good-sized hospitals. So, unfortunately, but yes, it is a beautiful place to be.
Okay, well, that was my sort of great idea. Just before we end this session, can I ask Lani, Julian, Brad, if this, Brad, you mentioned nobody's holding their breath about this Trans-Tasman bubble, and then there's also the Pacific bubble. If the border wasn't to open at all until early next year, what do you think the implications are for hotels? In the sentiment survey, there was a high proportion of people that were saying that they were looking for this border to be open in the last quarter of this year, and I guess certainly by Christmas. If it isn't until early next year, do you think that would be the case for government to step up further? Have you got any comments about that? Say, Julian?
Look, I think regardless of the Tasman bubble, we do need more support, and I think government does need to step up further. Look, I guess there's no crystal ball and no answers, but we know our industry is one. I think a lot of more communities have seen that the soul of their community has been lost as restaurants have been closed, as different small operators have been closed. I think more communities have understood that tourism brings so much. I don't think we're going to hear over tourism for a while, so that hopefully should park, and hopefully that'll help us not get many more taxes and rate increases, but we need support. I mean, I think this is an amazing industry. We know, we all love the country. We all think we have the most beautiful country in the world. We understand the need to protect it, but economically, there are only 5 million of us. We need other resources and other patronage to be able to see our country flourish. We don't have enough taxpayers. We're quite small. We need these people to visit us. Hopefully, how the government has been perceived publicly around the world and the message on how New Zealand is progressing with this will be a positive one. But again, at one stage, we do need to accept visitors. Just on something to watch, French Polynesia is about to open its borders with Europe on the 15th of July for flights, international. It's a small nation and a small island nation, and it will be quite interesting to see how that occurs and what the traffic's like and what the medical reactions like, and hopefully nothing in relation to COVID grows in that region. And that will be one to watch, and that is really from the 15th of July, which is around the corner. Again, watching the states in Australia, hopefully they'll be arguing so much with each other in Victoria that they'll want New Zealand faster. But I think realistically, if we had anything before the end of the year, we would all be joyous. But I think we are all trying to be conservative for forecasts and to really have like a low, medium and base case type scenario that we're all working to. We all need to reshape though, because we want to survive. And you can't ignore the fact that we have to look at things differently. How can we operate differently? What do we need to do to get through this? But look, it's an amazing situation we're in. I think together we're stronger, and one voice, and to try and get as much. I think TIA's done a wonderful job in a lot of the advocacy that we've seen, but we need a lot more. And I think that message is coming loud and clear. Be inclusive, share more information, whether it's Tourism New Zealand, government, any other body, that we're all in the plan together and we can all plan ahead. We all need the information to be able to work together and succeed.
Okay, thanks very much, Julian. And can I thank our three industry leaders very much for your comments and your input today, and sharing your insights and for the candid ways that you have shared your experience with us. It's 11 o'clock, so we need to move on. And over to you, Sally. Thank you very much.
Great, Stephen. Could I perhaps just ask one question of the panellists? I mean, obviously there is a, if borders opened, whether it be with Australia or the Pacific Islands, there is a risk that those that domestic market then heads offshore, rather than, and so at the moment we're seeing some of them actually, you know, decide to take a domestic holiday, but suddenly if borders open, there's all sorts of other options open to them. So how do we ensure that, that they still consider New Zealand as an option in that space?
I think New Zealand has been viewed so positively by Australians and how we've dealt with things to date, that you'd see a far greater number of Australians want to come here. And I think there's been some surveys that have proven that actually recently, that NZ is clearly a number one market for Australians anyway. But I think that would, you know, people will come here in droves, is what we've heard and learned in regards to stuff that I've read. So I think that we'd be in for a more positive balance of arrivals from Australia in regards to the way that we've, in response to how we've dealt with things so far.
Okay, thanks, Brad. So look, thank you to the panel and to for the insights you've provided, and to Stephen for facilitating that. So we'll now move across to our overseas speakers for a global perspective on the implications for hotel distribution systems arising from COVID-19. So we won't have time for Q&A at the end of this session, but if you do have questions, please do send them through, and we will forward them through to John and Ted, and they will answer them, and then that information will also be provided up on the Hotel Conference website. So please welcome John Burns from HTC Hospitality Tech, and John is based in the US, and we also have Ted Horner of E. Horner and Associates, who is currently in Australia. So Ted, can I hand across to you? Thank you.
Thank you for all those who have joined. Couple of minutes. Can everyone hear me? Oh, good. So a couple of points, just as a follow-on before we move on to the technology thing. I have a mother-in-law in the South Island of New Zealand, so the sooner the bubble can be fixed, the better. But I'm concerned about the comments of our Prime Minister, and his comments are, if we, as Australians, if we can't travel to our own interstates, then how the hell are we going to get to New Zealand? And sadly, with the increasing outbreak in Victoria, now with 10 suburbs in Melbourne now locked down, I'm concerned that some of the states, and already now, a number of the states in Australia have opened up, and with the one exclusion of being Victoria. And I'm concerned that if we have that thing, that it might push out the arrival of the bubble. And the other thing I'd like to say as well is I've got to put a plug in for my, I have a client in the Cook Islands, the owner of the Rarotonga Beach Resort, who is really pushing as hell to try and get New Zealanders to travel to the Cook Islands rather than Australia, or as an alternative anyway. So I'd like to make a few comments about technology, and I note already that one question come up on the chat session. But the reality today, I think I'm stating the obvious here, but post-COVID, the way we run our hotels is going to be very different. I think it's effective. I think we've really got to accept the fact that we're going to be running hotels with far less occupancy and probably trying to run our hotels with 30 or 40% less labour. And also, of course, the two touch words in our industry are contactless and touchless. And already I'm in a consulting job here in Sydney where I've just done a full evaluation of a very large hotel moving fully to digital key. And we think that COVID will drive increased usage as a result of that. So using your mobile key, we're going to see arrivals of other things as well. So I think the reality is we know our industry is struggling. Technology, I believe, is going to play a big role. And I'm pleased to hear that in the comments in the earlier field that some people in New Zealand are already making the decisions to look at technology and maybe invest. Perfect time to do it if you can afford it while you're quiet. And I think the benefits of that will be there and become very obvious. But what I'd like to do now is to introduce you to John, a professional colleague of mine who I've known for close on 30 years. John, over to you, and you can take us through your observations and trends in the distribution and OTA world and technology COVID times. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Ted, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all, ladies and gentlemen, if only virtually. I'm a US-based hotel systems consultant. For over 25 years, I've worked with hotel brands really across the globe as they attempt to select and implement systems, property management systems, central reservation systems, revenue management, and so on, to support guest efforts. To competently support my clients, I attempt to understand the trends that are changing the hotel operations environment, and then to aid my clients to understand and prepare for those trends. Like you, in terms of trends, in terms of events, I've never seen anything as disruptive to hospitality operations as what we see today. But nonetheless, those are disruptions. I attempt to discern the trends that my clients still need to be aware of, and I'm happy to share briefly about a dozen trends with you today in the hope that hearing them is useful and helps to aid your thinking and your decision process. First, I've titled Safety, and that trend is the concerted and really essential focus on COVID-19 related health and safety. Everyone, it was clear in the conversation this morning, and everyone in the hotel business worldwide is looking for new protocols. What we've seen is a proliferation of diverse, generally brand level sanitation and infection prevention protocols. Fair enough. While the intentions are well-meaning, the fact is that the outcome has been the uncoordinated development of dozens of infection prevention protocols. And that's resulted in some confusion and some uncertainty, as much really as reassurance. Not only has there been little coordination between hotel providers, leading to announcements of dozens of different programs. The programs themselves are a good trend, but we really don't have communication between the hotel companies or consultation with travelers, travel managers, or travel agencies and agents. So we've got a lot of noise with respect to health and sanitation. It's encouraging, but it is not coordinated. Plus, I would say that despite good intentions and sincere efforts, there are numerous reports of inconsistent application of the health and sanitation protocols at property level. So the bottom line is we're moving in the right direction, but we do have challenges in terms of coordination and in effective execution. Second trend is what I call protocol promotion. And it is clear that guests want to know what we are doing to protect them as they search for possible hotels to stay in. It's urgent that we communicate this information early and consistently. So far, we've been doing a fair job of it, but it's still spotty. We know that detailed information must be present on the hotel website. We know that we have either on the hotel or hotel brand site to talk about our programs in depth and detail to reassure our prospective clients. We know that that same information must appear in the global distribution systems such as Amadeus and Galileo. Today, it is there sometimes not. We've got work to do there. We also know that this information needs to appear in the online travel agencies, the OTAs like Expedia and Booking. Our problem is that today, as people search for us in these booking channels, the data is incomplete, and sometimes, especially on resellers' websites, a generation removed from Expedia or Booking, it is inaccurate. So we've got a challenge here. We, at this point, have, in some cases, a loss of bookings or failure to book, as people say, I'll look elsewhere, or I will use an alternative accommodation option, or I will opt not to travel at all. So bottom line, we've got a major challenge in terms of promoting the protocols that we've worked hard to develop. Next is what I'm calling super targeted marketing. And this will sound familiar given the conversation over the last 60 minutes. Every hotel's business source pattern has been changed by the pandemic. So we've got the impact of stay-at-home orders. We've got a reluctance to fly. We've got the situation where both corporate and leisure travel are drastically reduced. There isn't any international travel to speak of. And especially important to upper or larger facilities, really no conventions, no groups, no events such as weddings. So now what we see is the highest volume market is leisure. Okay, specifically local leisure and drivable leisure. It means it's incumbent upon us to think in terms of targeting that sector, how we challenge it, to recognize our properties. The trend is to do local advertising, to talk about a local vacation or a staycation in the city or town where you are, and to go beyond weekends. In many cases, we have potential guests who are liberated from a Friday, Saturday, Sunday stay period. The challenge, and to some extent, the trend is to say, you can come anytime you want. We're warm and welcoming, and we'd be delighted to receive you. In North America, the busiest hotels at this point are limited service properties and extended stay properties, although we are seeing some growth in leisure properties at a resort category in destination areas. So the resorts coming back slowly, but the majority of business going to limited service and, interestingly enough, extended stay. Next trend, pardon me, uncertainty about discounting. There is, not surprisingly, given the circumstances, an expectation of room rate discounts. Pardon me. Hotels are encountering requests for discounts. They have been, by and large, able to hold their own in terms of discounting. And the majority of discounts that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing reported, are in the 10 to 20% area. Occasionally, it's going beyond that, but hotels are showing a trend of emphasizing value add. So they're saying we have promotions, we have add-ons, we have special programs for you that provide the value you're looking for, and it's not necessary for us to discount heavily. Next, friend or foe. There's uncertainty in the hotel community, certainly amongst the operators I'm dealing with respect to the future strength of first OTAs and then alternative accommodation providers. All right, we look at OTAs and see that traveler sentiment towards OTAs is much more negative now than it was in the past. And most of this is due to the numerous issues related to cancellations and refunds over the last few months. We also know that hotel operator sentiment towards OTAs is negative as a result of the high cost of OTA reservations. There's a definite interest in direct bookings by hotels and a real effort to get people to book directly. Okay, what we know though is that OTAs are very skilled in leveraging their power, their marketing dollars in times of crisis. We haven't seen them press us for strong deals or be active in the marketplace at this point, but it's early. So we have to be prepared for tough conversations with OTAs. We first of all have to decide what our relationship with OTAs is going to be going forward. The other thing we need to think about is our competition from alternative accommodation providers. Will travelers prefer Airbnb or vacation rental options to a hotel? I say, why should they? Okay. But the fact of the matter is Airbnb is reporting strong interest in their product. So clearly there is continued comfort with homes provided by an accommodation provided by Airbnb. We'll see what happens. Next trend, touchlessness. There's certainly widespread installation and use of touchless technology in hotels. Now, that technology, generally app-based, and it enables a host of different services, contactless check-in, guest room access, keyless access, entertainment selection, possibly heat, air conditioning control, dining reservations, communication with hotel services, remote checkout, all kinds of things. All right, so we're seeing this, a real plethora of choices. They're early stage in many cases. They're still clunky, certainly compared to what they're going to be as they become more sophisticated, and they're being challenged to interface with PMSs and our other hotel systems. But there's certainly an interest on the part of hotels to install touchless technology so that they can provide greater comfort to customers. There's an interest in customers in minimizing contact with guests, and we have scores of vendors to evaluate when we look at touchless technology. It's an active area. It's one of the few really active areas of hotel technology right now. Social distancing. We have reduced guest to staff contact. Okay, increasingly we have arm's length relationships. We use kiosks for check-in. We're using plexiglass barriers. We're fighting to eliminate queues. It's an important trend. It may be somewhat comforting in the near term. I find myself asking, is this the new normal? Is it permanent? Does it need to be? Are we seeing some of the thinking with respect to the communication of the disease changing? Will we be hiding behind plexiglass for the next 2 or 3 or 5 years? Is there a penalty for hotels with this more distanced service? Don't know, but clearly it's a short-term trend. Another trend, what I'm calling bare bones accommodation. The fact is that we are increasingly selling stripped down guest rooms. No coffee maker, no hair dryer, glassware is removed, no toiletries, ice buckets gone, magazines and directories gone, stationery, pens gone. Some guests, in fact, are bringing their own linens. All right, we can understand this. It causes some short-term operational challenges as we're forever running coffee makers and hair dryers back to guest rooms. We have to do it in the short term. Is it the new normal? Is it a long-term trend? I don't know. It's certainly short-term. Does it need to be now? Yes. Is there a penalty at some point? A challenge to our value proposition for this bare bones accommodation? Possibly. Staying local. We're getting to the end of this list. Staying local. So what we see is the emerging pattern of using on-property facilities. Guests are saying, rather than go out, we're happy to stay in. And that's good news for us. It means that we need to be careful about our social distancing, careful about queues and queue management, about reservations. But the fact of the matter is there's the opportunity for increased guest contact, positive guest contact, and revenue generation as a result of this interest in staying in. Last couple, struggling to pay the rent. There's some inability to cover mortgage and other payables. I hear too many stories of management companies terminating service contracts with owners and of owners handing back property keys effectively to banks. It's not a good trend. Bleak budget expectations, especially for technology investment, which is very much in the hearts of Ted and I, a bleak outlook for next year. We're spending this year's budget. People are just starting to look at next year's, the 2021 budget. People are telling me, CIOs, chief marketing officers, We just have to pay the basics at this point. So I think we're going to go from what hotel technologies always think of themselves as doing more with less. Next year, we may be doing more with nothing. Job insecurity, a trend amongst all the staff, everybody I'm dealing with. Uncertainty about duration. Will my hotel survive? Will my hotel company survive? What will tomorrow's hotel look like? To be determined. So last one, I've called a realistic or aspirational outlook for recovery. And I attempt to balance what I see as a trend in terms of good positive thinking with respect to recovery. Balance that with what I hear, especially here in the United States, when the news is not good in terms of the spread of the pandemic and the spread of infection. We need to understand that this is the first battle in a war, and we are not going to win all battles before we win the war. Do we have resilience? Do we have the depth? Are we preparing our staff and our owners for probable setbacks in still searching for that ultimate victory? So these are the trends I'm seeing. Looking out, I see many negatives, many challenges, and much disruption. But fundamentally, there are a couple of things I know. One, people want to travel. Two, people will travel. And three, people will need hotels. But maybe not just yet. Ted?
Summation. Now, a couple of questions for you, John. Of all the points that you raised, and they were quite numerous, which one do you think is the most critical that hotels should really focus on of the 12 points you raised? Is there one that you think really stands out as critical that every hotel should be really zeroing in on?
My last point about being prepared for bumps in the road is important. But we're focused in this conversation with reservations and distribution and technology. And I think we need to make sure we control our destiny with respect to direct bookings, how we are going to become experts in e-commerce so we sell ourselves really effectively and avoid becoming the captives of the OTAs. I think we can do a much better job. They are full-time e-commerce specialists. We have to fight to catch up to their level of expertise, but we can do it, and we can do a much better job of selling our value proposition and really the experiences that we can deliver.
So do you think as a number of major hotel chains, John, are rolling out next generation mobile apps where you can book a room, you can then select mobile key, you can order room service, etc. And these hotel chains are really making sure that this technology is available only to their loyalty members. Do you see that as a way, with COVID coming along as well, that this move to mobile mobility and mobile apps, etc., could drive new business directly to major operators' websites as opposed to OTAs?
I think it can. I think there is a lot of appeal in the touchless method of operation and visiting a hotel. I worry that people don't want to have a dozen different hotel apps. And there's some reluctance to load yet another app or to become involved in the program. I do expect some hotel companies to say, look, we have a light version of our Marriott or Accor or Hilton app that we'll use strictly for check-in, keyless door entry, that sort of thing. And that'll be a light version that can lead to full participation in the program. But ultimately, the hotel issues aside, I think it is a compelling add-on, value add, as against the OTAs where you are still somewhat anonymous.
Okay. The second question is that, you know, you and I have been in the business a long time, and we've come up with this wonderful term, high tech, high touch. So as we transition to contactless and touchless, Where do you see hotels in the future moving to try and balance the still the need for some level of personal interaction, as opposed to people maybe eventually bypassing front desks altogether and going directly to their room and using their mobile phone? And how do you think, particularly at the 5-star level, how do you think guests are going to react to that? Is it a demographic thing that might relate to millennials as opposed to baby boomers like myself? What do you see how that's going to play out from a technology and balancing against that need for the personal interaction?
I think there are going to be a series of steps. First, I think there's going to be forgiveness by the travelers who say, I'm happy to have less contact in this near term. I want to stay safe. I want to stay healthy. I do believe after, let's say, 18 to 24 months, a couple of years from now, people are going to say, I'm paying this money, I'm looking for service. And service means contact, service means relationship. We can do some of that relationship through artificial intelligence and use of our customer data, our guest data. But my hope is that within a couple of years, when people are showing social distancing fatigue, that we're going to have this virus under control and we're going to be able to re-implement some of the customer service features that we've had to suspend temporarily. I don't think distancing is the new normal. I think it's the new temporary normal. And I hope so.
I just picked up on one of the questions that someone asked, and it's quite a good question actually. So I'll throw it into the mix to you. As you mentioned earlier about health and hygiene, our methods of communicating that to guests, do you see in the future that ratings organisations will start adding those components and rating hotels based on their commitment to hygiene, sanitation, etc.? And how do you think that could become a possibility, that hotels might be re-rated based on whether they're committed to that or not?
It's actually not speculation. It's already underway. I've already seen several reports of, first of all, organizations collecting this information, and secondly, considering it in their ratings. So it's going to be fundamental. And just as, for instance, here in the United States, the government sets criteria that says you have to have smoke detectors in rooms. There's going to be a minimum standard for health, safety, and sanitation. And this is definitely going to be part of both the acceptance criteria and the rating criteria. I see no alternative to that.
So do you see this investment in health and hygiene as a purely an exercise in combating COVID-19? And once and if a vaccine is found, do you think a lot of the things that hotels have rolled out during this period will be retained if there is indeed a vaccine for COVID-19? What do you think of the components that we're seeing now that you think will become the norm moving forward?
Well, you alluded in an earlier question to millennials and Gen X, Gen Y. They have different expectations than, for instance, you and I might. So they're going to be looking for a more electronic device-centric experience. So what we're seeing now in touchless will persevere. But I do believe that we will see also a smarter environment where when we see people, we recognize them, we know more about them, and we greet them and treat them differently. So I think this is going to be a learning experience. We're not locked into this regimen permanently. We're going to emerge from it. We're going to emerge different, and we're going to emerge pulling the best pieces of what we've learned as a result of this traumatic experience.
Sally, I think I'm looking at the time. Have I got time for one more question, or would you like to bring matters to an end?
No, I think you've got one more question, and then we'll finish sign the webinar off.
So one of the questions is, and you alluded to it earlier, John, is this: we need to roll out new technology, but we've got no money. What do you think about the idea, and it's being raised overseas now, and you and I have previously talked about this, is that as we move to a operating OPEX model, as we call it, or software as a service, what do you think the possibility to make it easier for hotels to invest in new technology if we move away from a license fee based on the number of rooms to a fee based on the number of occupied rooms? Do you think that's going to become something that we can see in the marketplace, that vendors being more willing to do deals will move from a number of rooms license as opposed to an occupied rooms model month by month?
In a word, yes. The fact of the matter is that just as we have hotels struggling to survive, we have vendors struggling to survive. And some of them are saying, I need to change my business model. And they're definitely looking at that. As that enters the realm of practicality, as we work through how to do that and how to survive within it, we're going to see an evolution to the point where that will be one of the options. We'll have vendors who say, you can do it A, B, or C. You've got 3 ways to pay, and based on occupied room is one of them. So we're going to see more flexibility.
Right. Sally, I think that's my last question. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, both John and Ted, for your insights on the industry. And look, I think it was encouraging to hear that people want and in fact will travel. Look, the reality, and I think it's come through from all the speakers, is that we've certainly got some challenges ahead of us. However, as an industry, we have proved, and history shows that we are resilient and that we are positive people. And look, and I think we are seeing that there are a lot of hotels, or there are hotels around New Zealand reopening perhaps earlier than they expected, and some staff are being offered re-employment opportunities. And we're certainly looking forward to the upcoming school holidays and the ski season. But it is important that, as John touched on, that we also consider within all of this, the safety of our guests and our staff is paramount, along with suppliers, and we make sure that we communicate that information. I think the other thing that came through loud and clear is the concern about the lack of timely decisions coming out of government, and that is proving challenging for operators and owners in terms of the decisions that they themselves need to make. And we certainly need more clarity around those support levels, whether it's a continuation of the wage support, whether there's some sort of business subsidy out there to assist with those fixed costs, and in fact clarity around what is happening with the Trans-Tasman bubble. Also, again, you know, that one voice, that need for unity and connection across the entire sector is really critical to our survival, and we will certainly get through this. So look, could I just take a last opportunity to thank all the speakers and the panellists today, and also to everyone who's actually attended this online hotel event. And we are looking forward to seeing you in person next year at the Hotel Conference at the Cordis on June 16, 17, 2021. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week, and stay warm in New Zealand anyway. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.